Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. ASR, our friends over there, have had a very productive week and a half. Of course, they released version 2.0 of their Ferrari 643, but in the meantime, they've also released this, point 2 beta of the 1991 Williams FW14. This car hasn't been around all that much in Assetto Corsa in recent months. The 1.9 update for AC took away external sounds on most third-party mods. Therefore, developers are now slowly starting to get the message and fix those cars and get them back on track for all of us. ASR have done just that with the FW14. Of course, we've seen a lot of good releases from ASR lately, and this one fits in very nicely indeed. It has that ASR standard of quality that we've all come to expect, and to have it back is just wonderful for all of us. The FW14 and FW14B, of course, these cars raced in 1991 and 1992 respectively. They are probably two of the most legendary, instantly recognizable Formula One cars throughout the entire history of the sport. Simply because this car, designed by Williams, Patrick Head as technical director, and Adrian Newey as chief designer and head aerodynamicist, those two cars became the standard for Formula One design from 1991 pretty much all the way out to 2005. So good were those cars that every team up and down the grid said, we need to implement a similar design, and then it dictated the direction of the sport from then on. Absolutely wonderful, and to have this car in Assetto Corsa, I believe, is an absolute must. Some specifications on the FW14 and FW14B for all of you. Of course, designed by Patrick Head and Adrian Newey for Williams Grand Prix Engineering in 1991. The 1991 version of this car is what we call a passive car, meaning that we have a more or less conventional, traditional suspension layout with push rods going into mechanical dampers on top of the chassis in front and mounted to the gearbox in the back. The 1992 version of the car, perhaps more famous than the 91 version, debuted active suspension, which was very controversial but very effective, and most of you who know about the active suspension concept, you'll know that it was implemented in order to mitigate effects of weight transfer. Those of you who have watched the Sim Racing 101 video number 6 about weight transfer, you'll know all about weight transfer and what it does and how it affects a car. That active suspension that Williams came up with for 1992 was devised to mitigate those effects of Newtonian physics and basically say, well, laws of the universe? No, you're not going to slow us down. So with the active suspension, they were able to change the ride height, roll rates, pitch, yaw, things like that on the car as it's going around on track, all actuated hydraulically and controlled electronically. And of course it was very controversial, but very effective, and that's the championship guys of this car, 1992, when Williams took the Constructors and Drivers' Championship with Nigel Mansell and Riccardo Patrese. In 1991, the specs are as follows. In the back, we have a 3.5-liter Renault V10 engine, 67-degree bank angle on that engine, normally aspirated, revving to about 14,000 RPM or so, about 750-ish horsepower, I would say. 1991, they ran the RS3C engine exclusively. 1992, Renault came out with the RS4, again, a more or less identical engine, just improved a bit for reliability and power, but another 67-degree bank angle on that V10, 3.5 liters. The gearbox was a 6-speed semi-automatic developed in-house by Williams, so again, a V10 engine, a semi-automatic gearbox, paddle actuated of course. Those design elements became ubiquitous in Formula One hereafter, and that V10 6 or 7-speed gearbox layout was the standard between 1991, starting with this car, all the way up to 2005 at the end of the V10 era. So this car became the archetype. Competition history on the car. Between 1991 and 1992, the car participated in 32 Grands Prix. It won 17 of them. It took pole position for 21 of them and set fastest lap in 19 of them. In 1992, this was enough to secure the Constructors' Championship for Williams and, of course, the Drivers' Championship for Nigel Mansell. In 1991, when the 14A spec came out, there were some teething problems, mostly with that semi-automatic gearbox. Ferrari developed that technology, debuted in 1989. Williams, of course, obviously very impressed with it. They took that technology on as their own and developed it further, but they still had some problems rolling it out, and that's one of the reasons why McLaren, with their MP46 running a traditional H-pattern manual gearbox, was able to get the upper hand on Williams in 1991 and take the Constructors' Championship and, of course, the Drivers' Championship, his third and final one for Ayrton Senna. 1992, though, they mastered it and then coupled it with the active suspension. Williams absolutely unbeatable. That trend continued into 1993 with the FW14C, the ultimate development of this overall concept, taking Alain Prost to his fourth and final World Championship, and then, of course, another Constructors' Championship for Williams. That car was an entirely active car. I remember Prost, he described it kind of like a little Airbus, he said it was. Airbus, of course, being an aviation manufacturer. They produce many airliners and military aircraft. Very, very technically sophisticated. Prost comparing the car to an Airbus, you get the idea. In terms of what ASR have given us, however, again, this is the quality that we have come to expect from them. Just as the car rotates here across the front end, you can see how all the lines are very, very crisp and neat. The sponsorship graphics look very good. We've got that deep blue paint that Williams were running in this era. Looks very nice in direct light. And then, of course, you've got these great reflections running everywhere on the car, on these flat as well as curved surfaces. Very nice. You can see that sculpted profile in the center of the front wing. Very true to life, very nicely modeled. Looking a little bit more rears, you can see the suspension pickup points for the wishbones, and then of course the push rods going into the top of the chassis there. Very nicely done. Great textures throughout, and again, the modeling is just very neat and very tidy. Looking toward the wheels here, just like on the 643 and many of their other cars, you can see very nice lettering on the tires, the Goodyear Eagle, of course, and then you can see the stamps on the sidewall with all the disclaimer and technical information on the tires. Chalk marks you can see, set A, well, compound A, set 4, the working ranges and the temperatures there. Looking into the wheels, the Fun Metal wheels, that nice powder-coated black. See the valve stem for adjusting tire pressure. And then into the wheel itself, you've got that carbon ceramic brake disc and the 4-piston caliper. Very nicely done. You can even see direct sunlight on it, but that's an AP Racing caliper right there. Nicely modeled. I love the detail. Looking into the midsection of the car, you can see, if you compare this to the 643, this car is so much cleaner. It's a lot slimmer. Of course, part of that is packaging reasons, because Ferrari were running a V12 and Williams are running a V10, so slightly larger engine in the Ferrari, but everything is just more streamlined, slimmed down. Everything's a lot more tightly packaged, and of course, the slimmer you can keep any sort of vehicle moving through air, the less drag you're going to generate, which is going to make it more efficient aerodynamically. Absolutely wonderful. Great details here throughout. You can see the side of the engine cover there with that matte finish. Very nice. And then, of course, the flat sections of the side pod, nice reflections. Moving to the rear section, see the suspension coming in from the outboard sections, in underneath the bodywork, mounting to the gearbox. Very nice. The prop shafts coming out from the differential to the rear wheels. Great stuff. And then, obviously, the massive diffuser at the rear. It's a deceptively simple looking diffuser, but it's functioning first of all as a traditional diffuser to funnel air from the under tray out into a low pressure zone at the back of the car to generate downforce. And of course you can see the exhausts coming through this diffuser into those secondary tunnels on either side. So you can definitely see that this is an exhaust blown diffuser. Of course, this is going to pay dividends in high-speed corners with generating more flow with that energized exhaust gas coming out from the engine, but it also makes the car a little bit sensitive through high-speed corners as well with relation to your throttle application. So you've got to make sure you're keeping the revs on and your throttle between half and full as you're going through corners. Otherwise, the rear end tends to do some interesting things. So go fast. That's basically the best way I can describe this car. Go fast, don't stop. Of course, coming through here on the three-quarter view of the rear, close in, you can see the bolt holes there on the end of the side pods. That they would be for that panel you can see blanked off, but that would give the engineers an option to run some ducting coming out of the side pod just for some more flow, perhaps when they want some more engine cooling. Great stuff. Of course, you can see texturing on the top sides of the tires here in that sunlit area. Very nice. And then, of course, just great detail all around. The shut lines are very clean. Everything matches up. Everything looks good. The shading is correct between body panels. It's just So polished already in point 2. Of course, we can fly into the cockpit. And here we go. Here you can really see the fusion of technologies. We're talking about 1991. And if you're familiar with the McLaren MP46, for example, that car is still very much analog. It's got a manual gearbox, it's got an LCD for the dash, but for the most part, everything basically harkens back all the way to the 70s. This car, nothing of the sort. This is all digital in here. This is truly the computer age. Everything in here is actuated by switches, buttons, or knobs. There's no gear lever, obviously, because we've got that paddle change semi-automatic gearbox, so paddles on the back of the steering wheel that you can just see there peeking out from the back side of the wheel. And then knob switches and buttons every which way for adjusting all sorts of different parameters on the car. You've got your LCD monitor. Of course, everything is turned off here in showroom view, but those windows along the bottom, they'll come up with lap time, a gear display, a fuel display, things like that. And then, of course, you've got your tach running across the top of the page that measures from 9,000 all the way up to 15,000 RPM. The engine revs pretty much to 13.5, 14 or so. You're going to be shifting around 13.2, 13.3. So roughly middle of the screen, that bar will scroll up to, and that's when you pull the next gear. But you can see here the other areas of the cockpit, everything very nicely modeled. You can see an umbilical going from the dashboard to the back, probably to communicate with some control boxes in the engine bay for the display, and then of course to monitor all the driver's switch inputs. Moving around to the bottom of the cockpit, you can see the seat's been nicely modeled. The weave of the carbon continues throughout. Very nice. And then, of course, moving to the back side, a couple things to point out. Obviously, center of the screen, that black circle area, that's the cushion for the driver's helmet. And then you've got this winglet here on the right side of the car, screen left, and that is where the onboard camera would be mounted. You can see that they have included the lens for that camera. Nice detail. And then from this view, of course, you would not be able to see this in real life unless you can turn your head completely backwards, but that air snorkel there looking very imposing from this angle. I love it. Coming around here, you can see the yellow and blue sections of the bodywork. Between them, you have this red and white stripe. Very nicely done. Everything is very crisp. The colors don't blend together too much. Very nicely done indeed. From this angle, you can see the bolt holes on the side pod bodywork for mounting and dismounting those panels to get access to the radiators and the control boxes in there. Very nicely done. And then, of course, you've got the windscreen, which has been very nicely modeled with its transparent effects. Nicely done indeed. And of course, this angle, here's where we're going to be driving it from. The eye point is pretty much where we're actually going to be on track, so you can get a sense of the proportions. You got the mirrors there, great visibility all around, and then your front wheels. They are rather large, and in some tight corners, they can get in the way of your view of the apex, but just look down the road a little bit more, and you'll be fine in terms of sighting the car. Everything looks very nice in here, and then of course when it comes alive, you will see all of it in motion. Coming out of the cockpit once again, and you can just see that great detail one more time. The car does come in all of the main liveries that you'll be needing. This is the test livery. You'll notice that the rear section of the car is now painted white rather than yellow. This is how they debuted the car in testing at a very soggy Silverstone, where the car got stuck in the mud, actually. So that was interesting, but this was the livery they ran. Of course, you get the test livery for Patrese as well, and then all of the race liveries with and without tobacco sponsorship for Mansell and Patrese. Mansell, of course, running that red number 5, Patrese number 6 in white. Very nice. Also, I'm lucky enough to have a 1/18th scale model by Assetto of this car, the FW14B, that model is, but looking at that model and then looking at this version of the car created here by ASR for Assetto Corsa, I've got to say that they have gotten everything pretty much spot on in terms of the shapes, sizes, and locations of everything. So, just absolutely wonderful stuff to see. Absolutely love it. I love the modeling. I love the textures. I love everything that ASR have been doing. Please keep it up, guys. It's just great. Of course, we've got to get this car out on track, and to do that, we're going to be going to Silverstone, and we're going to run it in this livery, Nigel Mansell Red 5. So stay tuned for that. See you at Silverstone. Welcome to Silverstone. Of course, before we get out on track, setups. These are all your default setup values. Let's have a look at what they are. Here on the gear screen, we've got our gearbox 1st through 6th gear. You can play with all the ratios. Of course, you've also got the ability to adjust the final drive. Tires, early 90s, you've got your choices of compounds. You've got qualifying, which of course is good for qualifying 1 to 2 hot laps on low fuel, and that's about it. You've got your softs and hards. We'll be doing this run on the hards. And of course, you can adjust your pressures. Ranges from 12 to 30 psi. Again, that 30 psi value, very high for a Formula 1 tire. Fuel, no in-race refueling in this era, so it goes all the way up to 215 liters. So the cars are very heavy at the start of a race. Suspension, any roll bars front and rear, wheel rates, ride heights, all 4 corners. Play with them any way you like. Aero, front and rear wings. You do not see the angle of attack on the wings change as you adjust. However, the adjustments are reflected in the car's behavior. Alignment, camber, and toe on all 4 corners as you would expect. Dampers, your bound and rebound, bump stops, fast and slow, things like that. Drivetrain, here are all of your differential adjustments, your diff power, coast, and preload. Generic, brake bias, the only thing on this screen, it is defaulted to 61% to the front. No anti-lock brakes on this version of the car. That came along in 1992 for a brief period. And the final screen, your advanced suspension settings. Here's where you set your travel ranges on all 4 corners as well as your bump stop stiffnesses. I'm going to be loading up my personal setup on the car because I've done some testing. You can see I've added quite a bit of rake to the front end just because the default setup had quite a lot of understeer in it, and I wanted to dial that out as much as I could. Hard tires for our run, and our fuel load is pretty much where I would like it. So in the cockpit, the car is alive. I want to adjust the eye point just a little bit. There we go. So everything is alive. You can see the dashboard, lap time ticking away there. You've also got our best lap time set. You've got your current lap delta and your fuel level, in addition to your speed readout. And of course, your tachometer, that'll come alive once we get above 9,000 RPM. And of course, for our illustration purposes, we've got our pedals in the lower left as always. So, we've got the track to ourselves here at Silverstone, and let's get out of the pit lane and get on with it. Get up and down through the box on our install lap. Start building some temperature in the tires. Going around slowly, the tire temps are just going to fall right off the cliff if we don't get on with it to some extent right away. And of course, these are the hard tires, so they will take a lap or two to really get into their working range. Scrubbing the front end across the track, generate a little bit more heat, get some flexibility into the tires there. And here we can start to get a peek of the new sound package for version 0.2. Completely reprofiled sounds on this release. The physics have also been completely redone, as has the overall 3D model. So just like we saw on 2.0 of the 643, ASR still hard at work on this car, even though it has been in beta in some form for about a year. Gonna get the brakes up now, a little bit more on the front end. Brakes still aren't quite up. Almost overshot the corner there. But now I think we can start to get on with the program a little bit. So I'm going to be cautious into this first corner. Still don't have the temperature I would like in the tires. Silverstone, particularly this modern reconfiguration, it really lends itself to medium to high downforce configurations, and you also want a lot of mechanical grip because corners like this, you're not quite up to really high speed yet, so you need to make sure the car is balanced nicely so you can take corners like that at full throttle. also why I'm being a little bit more cautious than normal on the warm-up here, because I just want to make sure things are really ready to go for it, because, again, you need grip. How we doing into Cops? Yep, we're pretty much there. You carry a little bit more speed on the apex. That will wait for the next lap. All right, I'm starting to get my confidence now. Car's reacting the way I expect. All right, so coming down Hangar Straight, we'll hit 192 or so as we come into the braking zone for Stowe. Everything now ready to do its job for me. Coming on to start finish, let's talk about handling. Initial impressions of the car from the default setup: understeer. Lots and lots of understeer. ASR do this on pretty much all of their releases, again, probably for reasons of accessibility, because a lot of these cars, particularly because they're Formula One cars, they demand concentration and consistency. So if you're not quite up to the challenge, you don't want to become discouraged straight away by spinning the thing. So understeer is your friend when you are just getting to grips with a car like this. Once you do feel comfortable, however, you will want to modify that setup to tune it more to your specific tastes. Once you do play with the setup, you can get more bite on the front end like I've got now, and even on the hard tires, that does pay dividends. I mentioned the sound package before. Very immersive, high-quality sounds. Again, that RS3C and RS4 engine that ran in this car had a very distinctive engine note, particularly from the onboards, and that general specification of Renault V10 ran for many years in Formula One in many different cars, so it's a sound that most of us are accustomed to. Very nicely replicated here. The engine power, very linear, very direct. There's a bit more torque in this car than there would be, say, from the 643 Ferrari. Doesn't rev quite as high, and of course, it is the same displacement, but Renault have a reputation for making torquey engines, and that certainly applies here. Not a tremendous amount of torque because it is a low displacement Formula One engine, but still there is enough grunt to get you out of the corners. You can get on the throttle early, but sometimes not to full throttle because it will break traction on the rear. No traction control on this either. Again, that didn't happen until 1992 as well. Gearbox, that Williams 6-speed semi-automatic unit, very responsive, very direct. You do not have to lift on the upshift or blip on the downshifts. That is all automated. The rev matching is very consistent and very good. It does not lock the rears under heavy braking. All very welcome indeed. Of course, because this is from 1991, you will notice a considerable gap in drive on the upshifts. Again, that's just because we're talking single clutch, as all Formula One gearboxes still are, but things were not quite as developed back then as they are now, so that seamless shift that we talked about with some later cars, that does not apply here by any means. Silverstone, of course, known for high-speed corners. You can take a lot of them flat out in this car. Just early 90s, lots of aero, lots of tires. Aerodynamics, well developed for their time, but kind of rudimentary by today's standards. Still sufficient to get this car that weighs only 505 kilograms around the corners in a hurry. Low speed, the front end is reasonably positive. Still a little bit of understeer in this setup. Some of that's probably down to the hard tires, but very manageable, very predictable. Through high-speed corners, not quite flat out through there. That's down to the hard tires. When we put softs or qualifyings on these, definitely flat out. In the traction zone, you got to be a little careful on the throttle, again because of that torque. But once tires do come up to temperature, things are a bit more manageable. through Woodcut there. It's a long corner. You got to hesitate on the throttle for a long time because you don't want to induce understeer. But once you are ready to release the car to track out, everything is just wonderful. We're not going to be flat through cops here on this setup with the hard tires, but again, when you've got qualifiers on the car, that can be taken flat out. I've gotten some apex speeds north of 170 miles an hour. And really good straight line performance. Again, over 190 coming into the braking zone. Absolutely awesome straight line speed, and it's really not to the expense of cornering performance. Very nicely designed car all around. It is good in all sorts of different conditions. Just did a 136, not a particularly fast time, but not too bad, considering this is a demo run. So far in terms of overall dynamics, even on this setup, a little bit of understeer, but sometimes mid-corner it will catch you out with some neutral slides. What I mean by a neutral slide is the front end isn't quite biting as strongly as it could anymore, but the back end is still more or less stable, so some understeer, but it kind of emulates a four-wheel drift in some cases. Again, it's all handled very nicely by the amount of downforce you've got. So, manageable dynamics in all conditions. Cops here. That's just not going to be flat, as you can see, using some of the overrun curbing there. But here is flat, easily, even on the hard tires. And of course, you got to start braking as you're ready to launch onto Hanger Straight. We were talking about before in showroom view when it comes to visibility, very good visibility throughout. Of course, you got this big antenna sticking out right directly in your line of sight, but somewhat counterintuitively when you drive really any sort of car, but in particular a Formula One car, because the speeds are such, you're not really looking straight ahead most of the time. This is also why you can get away with having dashboard displays that aren't so easy to read in some cases, as this one is definitely in that category. It's kind of low contrast, and of course, driver's hands get in the way of the screen most of the time, but you're not looking at it. Your eyes are drawn more so to the periphery when you're driving a Formula One car, and you've got great vision in those areas. You're, again, seldom looking straight ahead, so that antenna and the somewhat difficult to read display, not all that important. Only glancing around at those things when you're pretty much going in a straight line with a clear track. Just a slight twitch from the back end there as I got on the power. Again, hard tires. Must be a little careful. Dab of brakes, feathering the throttle through cops. Apex speed still around 160. Not bad at all. See the mirrors there, very good visibility. If I had other cars around me, I would know exactly where they were. And of course a sequence of fast downshifts there. No rear locking. Everything stays very well behaved, even under heavy braking. Nope, it's still not quite flat. Braking and turning, obviously some trail braking going on through there. Car still remains stable. Obviously you don't want to overdo it because your tires only have so much rubber on the road at any one time, and they can only generate traction in so many directions at one time. So obviously discretion is the better part of valor in those cases, but still, the car is up to the challenge, certainly. In terms of the quality of the modeling in here, the textures, the shapes and proportions of everything looks absolutely spot on from here. There's nothing from this angle that is particularly distracting, and certainly nothing from this angle that says anything with regard to imperfection. Again, 0.2 beta, this is still a reasonably early development of this mod, and again, ASR, they once again deliver very high quality from the word go. Cannot be more satisfied with this. Nope, try as I might, not going to be flat, not on the hards. And you can see with that sort of psychology going on, because the car is just generally so tractable in all conditions, it eggs you on to try and push it that little more on every lap. It just gives you plenty of confidence, it's very stable. There are no nasty surprises, so you really can't just start to focus and get on with the business of putting in some fast laps with this thing. You can see that torque from the Renault engine, second gear, plenty of power, plenty of grunt, and of course plenty of traction. In terms of overall feelings, the force feedback feels very good. The steering is reasonably weighted. It's not too heavy, but it's certainly not too light. You get good feedback from everything. You know exactly where all four corners are at all times. And I've got to say, the loading through the steering at high speed, you certainly can feel the downforce come on and off the car as your speed changes, but it's not going to be particularly fatiguing to drive this car, even if you've got your force feedback settings turned up. So certainly this car has all of the ingredients for some long runs and for some long races. Just playing with my turn in there. That's some oversteer. Got on the power a little bit too soon. Gotta watch out for that. Little understeer there, induced in part by the trail braking. Just love the mid-range sounds on this engine. You start to get back on the throttle through a high-speed corner, everything just kind of gurgles a little bit, and then it comes on full song, just as you'd hear in the onboards back in the day. Just love it. It has such a sense of authenticity to it. In terms of any shortcomings, the only things I have noticed that do need a little bit more work on this car so far, they are on the graphics side. And it has nothing to do with the overall modeling or proportions, anything like that. Just when you run the ride height a little bit low, before you get any sort of notifications in the setup screen when numbers start to turn yellow or red, you can still be in the white sections, technically good with the ride height, but you'll notice those little Venturi tunnels on the sides of the front wing. They'll start to morph or blend into the track surface, particularly when you're running at high speed and the downforce is really working across the car. They just kind of disappear below the road surface, and again, that's obviously something that's not realistic, and I'm sure that's a detail that ASR are going to be working on, but that's the only thing that I have noticed overtly to be a little bit of a flaw. Midway through the run here, tires feel good, the brakes feel good, everything is happy, and the performance is consistent. Transitional zones between mechanical and aero grip, like this corner here, still very stable. No issues there getting on the power, and no real issues with balance in terms of understeer or oversteer. Everything just comes on linearly and performs as you would expect. Again, no nasty surprises here. You can definitely see how this car served as the great basis for 2 world championships in the FW14B and the FW15C. All of the basic ingredients are here, and they just needed a little bit more fine-tuning before it really turned into an unbeatable package. Got on the entrance curbing a little bit there, started to pull me track left. No problem, just compensate accordingly, and you'll get it back. Over the bumps there, full throttle, engine's bouncing off the rev limiter. Great sounds, absolutely glorious stuff. Big bumps coming into stow. Gotta watch the brakes through there a little bit, because if the tire's off the ground, it's not generating grip, and of course you can lock it up. When it comes back down onto the road surface, it'll still be locked up, so just watch out for that. Running pretty consistently here in the 36s, low 37s at times. So on reasonably high fuel and hard tires, still a consistent car. That's probably our motif for this. Consistency. Competence and consistency. As the fuel load's been burning down, I've noticed cornering speeds have gotten a little bit higher, but again, everything very linear as you would expect. There are no harsh balance changes as the fuel load burns down. Everything still behaves as it did when you left the pits. Also, you can notice I'm able to use the curbing. The car is not too unsettled over the curbs. Everything is just absorbed nicely through the suspension. It just allows you to attack. Complex. All mechanical grip here. This is really where you got to be careful on the throttle, the traction zone, then it comes on. Overall, I've got to say, great driving experience. It is early 90s F1. It is pure power and pure tires with some aero thrown in. If you're into this kind of thing, as I am, you will very much enjoy this. It has a very different feel than the Ferrari 643, even though they were direct competitors with each other, simply because Williams just had a very different design philosophy. This car definitely more designed like an airplane than a race car, and that is the trend Formula One then took. And as I said in showroom view, this design philosophy basically defined Formula One, certainly through the 90s and even up to 2005. This was the gold standard. pit lane here. Pit lane speed limit comes on very early coming into this pit lane. Not quite sure if that's where the limiter line actually is in reality, but it gives you quite a long time to just cruise around here at 50 miles an hour and take in your surroundings. Listen to the engine on the limiter. Very nice. Stop a little short of our pit box. And there we have it. ASR's Williams FW14 in 0.2 beta, available on asrformula.com for donors. Again, a very reasonable donation sum of €1.50 is all they ask to partake in the beta test, and it's certainly a decision that you'll want to make in the affirmative, because this, again, like every other ASR car that we've been seeing lately, is absolutely brilliant, even though it is still in such an early stage of development. Everybody at ASR, you have done another fantastic job. You're doing a great service to the sim racing community, and particularly, I have to say, for us YouTube content creators, because your cars just look so good, everything looks so realistic. There's not a whole lot of editing that I have to do anyway to make these cars look absolutely phenomenal on screen. So thank you all so much for the work that you've been doing. For you, in my beloved audience, of course, hot laps will follow on low tanks and qualifying tires, so you'll get a sense of what this thing really can do when you string it out and just focus on the lap time. So stay tuned for the hot laps, everybody. FerrariMan601 saying thank you all so much for watching, and thank you for your continued support. Stay tuned for the hot laps.